Welcome to The Inspired Creative, the podcast for people who need a little extra help getting inspired or staying motivated to explore their creative side. My name is Paula Castle, and I actually don't have a guest with me this week, which is unusual, I know, but it was just such a crazy week for me. There were so many things going on. I was very busy at work. I had a lot going on at church. It was my birthday weekend. There was a big Super Bowl party on Sunday. And I just did not have the room in my schedule to meet up with any of my friends and get to sit down and interview them the way I wanted to. So rather than try to squeeze it in at the last minute or force somebody into a schedule that didn't work for them, I figured this week I'd just sit down and talk to you guys one-on-one. I hope that's okay. But we're going to start off this podcast the way we always do with a quote. And today's quote is by Oscar Wilde, who said, "Experience is merely the name men gave to their mistakes." And that's a really interesting quote that doesn't necessarily look like it fits into creativity straight off the bat. But it really captured my attention specifically because of the train of thought that I've been on for the past few days. Like I said, it was my birthday this week, and one of the interesting things about my birthday falling at the very beginning of February is that I've always sort of had this perspective about it, that it's kind of like New Year's Part 2. Right? Like New Year's happens on January 1st and everybody's excited. Everybody celebrates, obviously. But they also do things like make resolutions and try to turn over a new leaf and aspire to meet goals and to do things that they've never done before, that they've always wanted to do, or they feel like they should do. And so they go out and they make this big push. And sometimes if you're anything like me, you give yourself too much to do and you set goals that are too high and kind of unrealistic for your day-to-day life. And what happens? Well, what normally happens for most people is that by the time January is over, the resolutions are gone, they're missing, they are nowhere to be found, the goals are forgotten, and life has sort of taken over again. So what I've always loved about starting a new year for myself personally in February is that I get a fresh new year. I get New Year's Part 2. And then I realized I was talking to one of my friends who's from China, and she told me that today was the Lunar New Year that they celebrate in China. And I thought, oh my God, isn't that amazing that this is a new year for me? It's a new year for so many people who celebrate this holiday. And it's really a time for a fresh start. So that got me thinking, what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about giving yourself a clean slate. And I wanted to ask you guys, if you want to jump on board with this New Year Part 2 with me, you don't have to wait until next January to give yourself a clean slate. You don't have to wait until next year to start a new resolution. And if you want to start over fresh right now in your creative life, this is the perfect opportunity to do it. And when I'm talking about starting with a clean slate, I'm not saying, throw everything out the window and, give yourself a new goal and force yourself to push to do things you've never done before. What I was really thinking about for myself personally is getting rid of the clutter in my creative life. Now, what do I mean by clutter? Well, some of that is actual physical, literal clutter, stuff that I have around the house, projects that I started working on and stopped working on, or things that I thought I wanted to do and I got involved in and then realized it just wasn't working for me and I didn't have the heart to throw it away. Have you ever felt like that? Like you just feel guilty getting rid of something that you started working on and then you stopped. But that clutter doesn't have to be purely physical. The clutter can be mental, it can be emotional. It's the extra stuff, the baggage that we carry with us into the next day and the next day and the next day. And one of the best feelings in the world, for me anyway, is when I get a chance to declutter and sort of curate and minimize what I'm focusing on and what I have around me. My mom has always been a stuff person. So my house when I was growing up was filled with little trinkets and beautiful knickknacks, and every shelf had something special and unique on it that had a story that went behind it. And it was a beautiful and enriching environment to grow up in. But I realized as I grew up and I got my own space and I built my own house and my own home, every time I tried to decorate like my mom, it never worked. I always ended up with just a bunch of stuff. And I couldn't figure out why until one day I realized, we just have different personalities that way. So for me, I'm more comfortable when I get rid of all of the stuff. You know, my mom loves to read books, and we grew up in a reading house. And when I was growing up, we had a room, it was our den, that had a built-in bookshelf across the longest wall in the entire house. So it was massively huge bookshelf, and it had cabinets underneath, and there was a place for the television and all that. But it was this big wall covered in books. And my mom had such a big book collection that the books that she kept there was books behind the books. She had double shelved her books in order to be able to store them all. And it's not, she was, this sounds, I don't want it to sound like she's a hoarder or something. Each and every one of those books was precious to her. Each and every one of them had a story, or it was neat, or it was pretty, or it was cool, or she loved what she read, and she would read. I mean, she was an avid reader. So there was books in every room of our house. And there's still books in every room of my house. But I used to double shelve my books. And then one day I realized I had books, I was keeping them for the wrong reasons. I was keeping them because I felt like I needed to keep these things, when in reality, I felt so much better after I gave myself permission to give them away. So when we're talking about our creative lives, I think sometimes we get a little bit caught up in the clutter. We have a backlog of things that we have tried, and we either got bored with it, or it didn't turn out the way we wanted it to, or we failed, or we got distracted. And I'm not saying that you have to get rid of everything that's you've ever tried that you haven't finished, because I also think that there's an incredible value of going back to things, but there's no reason to keep something that isn't meaningful. There is no reason, if you've lost your passion for it and you don't see it as beautiful or challenging or inspiring anymore, and you're never going to go back to it, then why do you still have it? And I'm talking to myself here, because I know for a fact that I have things, I hold on to them because I feel guilty. I don't want to let them go. I have cross-stitch patterns from when I was in college. And I'm not going to tell you how many years ago I was in college, but we're in the double digits, okay? So I started some of them, and some of them I still want to keep because I want to finish them. I want to find the time, and I want to find the room in my schedule to sit down with the needle and the thread and finish the pattern because it's beautiful to me. Some of them I've kept just because I would feel bad about getting rid of them. I would feel guilty about throwing them away. But when I'm sitting and I'm thinking about decluttering and thinking about giving myself a fresh start and a clean slate, I have to ask myself in a very pragmatic way, what is the value of keeping something like this? And I know that there's, all sorts of movements about, keeping things that give you joy. And I'm not going to get into all of that. That's a different topic for a different podcast, and that's fine. But I think the spirit of that is a very honest and comes from a place of truth, in that if I don't have a passion for something, especially if it's something that I would have to work at to finish, then keeping that thing just for the sake of being able to say, I didn't throw it away, I didn't give up on it, doesn't hold any real value any longer. And I'm kind of guilty of this. The worst for me anyway is my quilting stash. I have a cabinet filled with fabric, stuffed with fabric. On top of the cabinet, I have shoeboxes filled with fabric. And on my shelves in my bedroom and in a box under my bed, I have additional stashes of fabric, because when I'm quilting and I'm in the mood to quilt, I'm in the place where I want to quilt, I'm always picking up new fabric that I think is pretty, or combinations that I think I want to make. But I also have a couple of quilt tops that I made 10, 12 years ago that I'm never going to finish because I didn't like the way they turned out. And this year, actually, I went through my stash and pulled out these tops and opened them up and looked at them and said, why? Why are they taking up valuable real estate in my already stuffed fabric cabinet? Why am I insisting on holding on to this thing that I created that didn't make me happy when it was finished? Am I ever going to sit down and go through the process of actually quilting that? Not unless I have to. And I can't imagine a scenario in which I would be forced to sit down and finish the railroad quilt I made when I was 25. That's in these weird colors and patterns that just don't appeal to me any longer. So why do you hold on to these things? I hold on to them because I feel bad getting rid of something that I worked so hard on. But what I love about this quote from Oscar Wilde is he almost gives us permission to accept our, I don't want to call them failures, but to take the things that didn't work out, the things that didn't produce something beautiful in the end, something that we were happy with, and to put them in a different category and call them experience. Did I make this quilt? Yes. Did it turn out the way I wanted it to? Maybe not, but that's okay. It doesn't have to turn out the way I want it to, because I can chalk that up to experience and move on and make the next quilt that much nicer, that much more in tune with what I know I like and what I love. I've learned from this mistake, and it's important to give ourselves permission to learn and to let go, because without it, we're going to be holding on to projects and ideas and half-finished pieces that we're just never going to finish. We're never going to do anything with them. And do we really want to spend the rest of our lives lugging them around, dusting them off, finding new places to store them, finding new places to keep them? What if it doesn't produce value in our lives? We need to be able to let it go. I was looking through my phone just today, actually, and I was going through, I have about, I'd say 100 voice memos of bits and pieces of ideas for songs, because we're always writing music at the church. And so I'm always trying to come up with a new hook, a new idea, a new direction, a new lyric that I like. And some of those I'm holding on to them because I know that there's something there that's beautiful that I want to develop. And maybe I haven't sparked the idea yet, and maybe I don't know what direction it's going to go, but I know that I want to keep it. And there's other things in there that I just realized I'm keeping because I came up with it, not because it develops any passion in me, not because I react to it in a good way, just because I don't want to lose something that I worked for. And I think that this is true for most creative people. I think that a lot of times we have a hard time letting go of what isn't working and giving ourselves permission to move on from what we made that we don't like. And I think I could be speaking just for me, but I hope that I'm speaking something that resonates with you, that maybe it's time for us to, for lack of a better term, grow up a little bit. And I don't want that to sound harsh, but mature into the realization that we're not always going to produce genius work. We're not even always going to produce work that we like and or love. That's part of the creative process. If we're not taking creative risks and experimenting, then we're not really creating, right? We're just filling in the gaps and painting by numbers. I can paint by numbers. That doesn't make me a painter. A true artist, a true painter can take a blank canvas and see a picture on there, and they do their best to develop that picture in their mind on the physical canvas in front of them. Sometimes it's a masterpiece, and sometimes I am sure it is a disaster. And it's okay to have some disasters in your life. It's also okay to give yourself permission to get rid of those disasters in your life. I cannot tell you how cathartic it is to go through your phone and delete those voice memos that you don't need anymore, or to go through my quilt stash and create a pile of fabric that I'm not going to keep. It's the same as going through your closet and getting rid of the clothes that you're never going to wear, but you feel guilty because you bought them, or going through, your piles of belongings and getting rid of the gifts that were given to you that you never really wanted, but you kept because you felt bad for getting rid of something that meant something to somebody else. I think that this is the opportune time, especially if we are moving in a creative direction, especially if we're pushing to give ourselves a new perspective. There's no better way to start that process than by letting go, by giving ourselves permission to clean house, maybe literally, maybe metaphorically, and just allowing ourselves to get rid of the baggage that maybe holds us down. Because here's the thing that happens, right? if you're like me, we'll talk quilt stashes. I don't know that that's going to apply to anybody who's listening, but we'll talk because that is a very physical thing that's easy to understand. If I go to the fabric store and I see a piece of fabric that I love and I want to develop a whole quilt motif from that, and I know already what I want to do, and I start picking out patterns and fabrics that match it and colors that will complement it, and so I've got a whole thing and I'm getting ready to go to the cutting table. I'm like, I'm going to make this quilt. You know, the first thing that happens in my mind is I think of all of the times I've done this before and all of the quilts that I haven't finished that are sitting at home waiting in line for me to get to them. Now, I haven't been quilting recently because I need to fix my sewing machine, so I am without a sewing machine at the moment. But quilting was always my most therapeutic, my favorite mindless activity. If I wanted to just make something, I would sit down at the sewing machine, I would quilt. I'd sit at the cutting board and I would cut out my squares or cut out my pieces and I get to going. And I'm not a master quilter, but I've made blankets and baby blankets and wall hangings. In fact, I might end up putting one of those up on Instagram and Facebook so you can see the wall hanging. Maybe the one that's in my living room right now, because that's one of my favorites. It's very simple. It's very basic, but it just makes me happy. And it's one of those things that I made just for me that turned out the way I wanted it to. But if I hadn't already given myself permission to go ahead and start this new project, right? If I hadn't said, if I had stood there and said, well, I can't make this wall hanging because I still have that plum quilt that I'm supposed to make that I need to finish because I have the fabric for it, well, then I wouldn't have the wall hanging because I still haven't made that plum quilt and I've had that fabric for years. But when we have all of this extra baggage attached to us, right? We have all of this extra, let's say, fabric sitting in our closet waiting for us to get to it, or this piece that you have to finish the top on. If it's not something that we're passionate about, and it's not something that inspires us or draws us back, if it's not something that we want to finish, then the only role that it can take in our lives is to fill up the space that we could use to create something beautiful. And it's not to say that every unfinished project is ugly. It's not to say that every unfinished project needs to be gotten rid of. And it's not to say that just because it didn't work out doesn't mean you can't fix it. The nice thing about, let's say, paint, for instance, is if you've painted a picture and it didn't turn out the way you wanted to, you can cover over it and start from scratch. You can go back and try to fix it. There's a million things that you can do. And I'm not saying you have to get rid of every old project and every unfinished piece, but we need to be at a point in our lives where we can give ourselves permission to just let go and start from scratch, start afresh. And don't think of it as losing something. Don't think of it as a waste of your time. Think of it as an experience that will teach you, that will inform you, that will educate you, that you can draw from in the future, so that the next time you're quilting, you know that as much as you love these 17 colors, they might not go together if you don't have the right combination. And it's okay to look at them and realize this isn't going to work right now until I have a better pattern. Or I'm not really sure what I want to do, so I'll buy the fabric, but I'm not going to commit myself to making something mediocre just to make something. And when we give ourselves that permission and we allow ourselves to just move forward with a fresh foot on a clean slate, it frees up our minds, it frees up our hearts, it frees up our souls, and it takes a weight off of us. Do you know what I'm talking about? I mean, it's really honestly a drag to hold on to the old stuff that you're just not going to go back to. And when we let ourselves let go, and maybe it means donating it to charity, maybe it means giving it away to somebody, maybe it means literally just throwing it away in the trash or recycling it, any and all of that is acceptable. It's totally okay not to finish. It's totally okay to just say, you know what? I tried. I don't like how it turned out. I'm done. It's totally okay to say, my taste has changed, and this thing that I started 5 years ago no longer appeals to me. I don't think I want to do it anymore. It's totally okay to say, I spent money on it. I worked a little bit on it. I should have finished it, but I didn't. And you know what? That money's gone anyway. I'm going to free myself of the additional burden of having to spend the time to finish a thing I don't even like right now. That's okay. So I don't really have much else to say, except if you want to, you can jump on board. this is what I'm doing this year. I am getting rid of the junk. I am getting rid of the garbage. I am getting rid of the clutter in my creative life. And project by project, category by category, area by area, I am going through and I am decluttering and getting rid of anything that doesn't strike me, that doesn't pull me, that doesn't ignite my passion. If I don't look at it and say, oh my God, I can't wait to get back to this, or oh wow, I forgot how awesome this was, or oh my goodness, the potential in this. If that isn't my reaction, I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to let it go. And every time I do this, because I do this periodically, but every single time I've done this, it has been nothing but a joy and a relief. It has made me happy in ways that are probably ridiculous. It's the most freeing feeling in the world to finally let go of these things that you don't even realize are holding you back. But I'm looking right now at my quilting cabinet, and there is a giant gift bag next to it filled with stuff that I'm getting rid of. And my cabinet is still packed to the gills, and I still have shoe boxes on top of it filled with other projects that are halfway done or a quarter of the way done, or I haven't even started them, but I love the fabric and I know what I'm going to do with it. But I have an entire gift bag filled with stuff that I just don't want to work on. And if I don't want to work on it, I'm not going to keep it. It's okay to let it go. It's okay to start fresh and new and to give yourself a clean slate. So that is the only takeaway I have for today. This is not going to be an especially long podcast episode, but if nothing else, if you don't take anything away from this episode except one thing, it's give yourself permission to get rid of it. Just let it go. Start from scratch if you have to. Clean out the clutter in your life. You won't believe how freeing, how relaxing, and how wonderful it is. So I'm going to end right there. But before I do, I just want to say thank you to all of the listeners, all of the subscribers, all of the people who have been finding this podcast and sharing it. It really means so much to me to see literally every time I refresh my feed and I see more people are listening and more people have downloaded it. It just makes me so excited to think of the community that we can build and the potential that this podcast has. And I want you all to be a part of it. So please, if you haven't already, go and find us on Instagram and on Facebook. We are at The Inspired Creative Pod at both places, Instagram and Facebook. And I'm pretty active on both. So if you post something or you write something, I will see it. I will respond to it. But if you want to write me a letter or give me some real feedback, feel free to email me as well. We are at The Inspired Creative Pod at Gmail as well. So it's basically The Inspired Creative Pod across the board. But feel free to find us in all of those places. Reach out to me on any of those avenues and let me know what you think. Let me know what kind of artists you'd like to have on this year. Let me know what's working for you, what inspires you, and what you're taking away from this podcast. Or if you have any critiques or any thoughts of how we can improve, please let me know about that too. I want to hear from you guys so much, and I can't wait to start these conversations with you. And of course, it goes without saying, but if you have a minute when you're done listening to this podcast, if you could just on whatever platform you're listening, just rate and review the podcast. It helps so much. It helps other people find it. It improves the algorithm, so it makes us more visible. It's a really quick and simple way to sort of spread this a little bit farther, even if you don't have somebody to share it with who would be interested. Please feel free to do that. We'd really appreciate it. And of course, as always, I want to end this by saying, go out there, be creative, get inspired. Let's make this world a beautiful and better place.